Long ago, when the earth was still young and the sky stretched endlessly over the land, there was a river that whispered ancient secrets to those willing to listen. This was no ordinary river, it was the River Boyne, the lifeblood of Ireland. Flowing through the heart of the island, its waters shimmered with the power of the old gods, and beneath its surface, in the depths of a sacred pool, lived the Salmon of Knowledge. The fish wasn't just a creature of flesh and scale, it was wisdom itself, an embodiment of the endless search for truth that had shaped Ireland for centuries. The Salmon of Knowledge had a story woven into the very fabric of the island. It was not merely a fish swimming in the cool waters of the Boyne, it was a living symbol of wisdom, both ancient and new, a reflection of the eternal quest for understanding. There, in the sacred waters, the fish fed on the nuts that fell from the sacred hazel trees that lined the riverbank. Each nut was said to hold a piece of knowledge, and as the salmon consumed them, it grew wiser with each passing year. The creature became something far beyond mortal comprehension, its very existence bound to the fate of Ireland itself. But it was not just a symbol of knowledge, it was the keeper of it, and the one who would grant it to those pure of heart and strong of will. The journey to attain the knowledge the salmon held was never an easy one. The story of the salmon was a reflection of the eternal struggle between human ambition and divine grace. It was a tale of patience, sacrifice, and destiny. And at the heart of this story was Fionn MacCumhaill, a young man destined to become a hero. Finn's tale began long before he had ever heard of the Salmon of Knowledge, long before his name would be spoken in the same breath as the greatest warriors of Ireland. He was a child of mystery, raised in the wilderness, his early life shaped by an ancient prophecy. The story of Fionn and the Salmon of Knowledge was not just about a man gaining wisdom, it was a prophecy fulfilled, a cosmic thread that ran through the very fabric of Ireland's history. The prophecy foretold that the one who could catch the salmon would be granted the wisdom of the ages, but it was never that simple. The Salmon of Knowledge did not belong to mortals, nor was it easy to reach. Its very nature was elusive, swimming beneath the waves of time and understanding, hiding from those who sought it out for selfish gain. The wisdom the salmon offered was not easily earned, it was not something that could be captured without consequence. Yet, there was always the possibility that someone would come, someone pure enough, someone destined to unlock its power. The River Boyne, with its mystic waters, held the key to Ireland's fate, and it was Finn's fate to cross that river, to reach the sacred pool, and to claim what was rightfully his. But he could never have imagined what lay ahead when, under the watchful eyes of the wise druid Finnegas, he cast his line into the sacred waters and pulled up the salmon. As Fionn, a mere boy at the time, sat with the wise old druid, he could never have known that the fish he caught was not just a catch for the day, but a gateway to the universe's deepest truths. The druid, too, had known that Fionn would be the one to taste the wisdom of the salmon. And it was not just Finn's destiny that was intertwined with the fish. The salmon's wisdom was a force that connected the mortal realm to the divine. The myth of the Salmon of Knowledge was part of a much greater story, one that stretched across the sweep of time and the rise and fall of civilizations. In the early days, the gods walked among humans, and the knowledge they brought was to be shared only with the worthy. The salmon, whose scales gleamed like silver and whose eyes seemed to see through time, was the keeper of all that was known. Every moment of creation, every whisper of the wind, and every movement of the stars was part of the wisdom it held within its form. There were those, like the ancient druids, who understood the true power of the salmon, and they watched over it, knowing that one day, a man worthy enough would rise to take its gift. And though the salmon had given its knowledge to the gods before, it was Fionn, born from the union of light and dark, a child of prophecy, who would prove to be the one who would take that knowledge into the world. But what is wisdom, truly? Is it the gift of knowledge itself, or the understanding that comes with it? The salmon knew the answer, and it chose Fionn, for it could see the purity in his heart, the fire in his spirit. Fionn was not merely seeking power, he sought to protect his people, to guide them in times of war and peace, to lead with wisdom and justice. The gift of the salmon would not only change Fionn, it would change the very course of Irish history. The boy who had caught the fish would grow into a man who could see the future, who could understand the language of the birds and the stars. Yet even as Fionn tasted the fish and the wisdom flooded into him, a great responsibility settled onto his shoulders. Knowledge is never a gift given without sacrifice. The wisdom the salmon imparted was a heavy burden, one that would define Finn's path. The lessons it brought were not always easy, and the path ahead of him would be paved with hardship and loss. The salmon, in its infinite wisdom, knew this too. As Finn's mind opened to the depths of the universe, he could feel the weight of the knowledge settle in his chest. He could see beyond the present, past the boundaries of time, and into the hearts of those around him. He was no longer just a boy, he had become something else, something older, wiser. But even as he stood on the threshold of greatness, the salmon's final lesson echoed in his ears: wisdom is not a destination, but a journey. And that journey would be filled with both light and shadow. The waters of the river Boyne moved in a quiet, rhythmic dance, flowing over stones that had known centuries of stories. It was as if the river itself whispered ancient secrets to those who listened carefully enough, and in its depths, the very heart of Ireland's wisdom was guarded. But the river's surface hid more than mere water. Beneath, within the mist that clung to the banks, were three figures whose names were as old as the hills, as timeless as the sky. They were the three sisters, the guardians of wisdom, the keepers of the salmon's secret. These three deities, more ancient than the first rain that touched the earth, were woven from the very fabric of the land itself. Each sister was as different as the seasons, but united in their purpose, to guard the wisdom that flowed through the Boyne, to protect the knowledge that could change the world. They were the daughters of the earth and sky, the embodiment of water's power, and they watched over the salmon of knowledge with unwavering devotion. The eldest sister, Bibhin, was as wild and fierce as the storm. Her hair shimmered like the darkest clouds, and her eyes reflected the ever-changing moods of the sky. Her power lay in the storms that whipped across the waters, her breath shaping the winds that could lift ships from the seas and scatter them like toys. She was the protector of secrets, fierce and untamable, keeping watch over the sacred pool where the salmon swam. To approach it meant to face her wrath, and she would not give up the knowledge lightly. Her temper was as quick as the wind she commanded, and only those pure in heart and strong in spirit could stand before her. Eriu, the second sister, was as calm as the dawn, with eyes like the still waters of a morning lake. Her beauty was the kind that made the world stop to listen to the quiet hum of nature. Where Bibhin was wild, Eriu was calm and nurturing, her touch as gentle as the rain that kissed the earth. She held the key to the salmon's location, knowing its every move, its every turn in the water. But Eriu did not give this knowledge freely. She would guide only those who had earned the right to know, for wisdom, in her eyes, was not a gift, it was a responsibility. She was the guardian of balance, keeping the waters serene and guarding the flow of wisdom. Where Bibhin was fire, Eriu was water, always finding a way to soothe what the storm had disturbed. The youngest sister, Ain, was a radiant figure of light and beauty. Her presence was like the first rays of sunshine after a long winter. She was the spirit of the river itself, the essence of life that surged through the land. With golden hair that shimmered like sunlight on water, Ain held the gift of renewal. Her laughter echoed like the tinkling sound of clear streams over stones, and where the other two sisters kept the wisdom hidden, Ain's gift was to share it. But even she had her boundaries. Ain gave hope and guidance, but she did so carefully, knowing that the path to wisdom was fraught with trials. Her love for the land and its people was pure, yet she too understood the dangers that came with unearned knowledge. Together, the three sisters formed a triad of power, with each one guarding a different aspect of the salmon's secret. They were the protectors of the pool, ensuring that only the worthy could approach the salmon's domain. Each sister had her role to play in maintaining the delicate balance of the world. Bibhin protected it with her storms, Eriu with her calm wisdom, and Ain with her shining light. But none of them could give away the knowledge completely, for the wisdom of the salmon was never meant to be possessed by one soul, it was meant to be shared, only when the time was right, only when a heart was prepared to carry it. When Fionn MacCumhaill first sought the Salmon of Knowledge, it was the three sisters who watched over him, unseen but ever present. They knew he had a destiny, one that would change the course of Ireland forever. And though each sister would approach him in her own way, none of them would allow him to take what was not earned. They tested him in subtle ways, pushing him to prove his worth, to show he was more than just a boy seeking power. They knew the risks of the wisdom he sought, for the salmon's knowledge could be a heavy burden for anyone unprepared for it. The first time Fionn approached the sacred pool, he felt the weight of their eyes upon him. The wind stirred around him, and he could almost hear Bibhin's voice in the thunder. Her challenge was clear: you are not yet ready. As the river's waters swirled, Ariu's calm presence seemed to settle over him, reminding him that patience was key, that rushing in would only lead to failure. It was not enough to want the knowledge, he had to be worthy of it. Ain's light, though subtle, seemed to beckon him forward, but there was a warning in her warmth. The road to wisdom is not always the road you expect it to be. But Fionn did not back down. The three sisters tested him, each in her own way, and as he continued his quest, he learned the importance of each lesson they imparted. He learned that knowledge could be as wild as a storm, as calm as a still lake, and as bright as the sun itself. Each of the sisters left their mark on him, and as he stood on the edge of the sacred pool, his heart and mind were forever changed. The salmon, waiting patiently beneath the waters, seemed to recognize the worth in Fionn, sensing the purity in his soul, the strength in his heart. But the sisters were not easily swayed. They would not allow just anyone to claim the wisdom of the ages. They knew that once the salmon's secret was revealed, there would be no turning back, and the world would never be the same. The three sisters did not merely guard the salmon, they were the keepers of a delicate balance. Their power was not in the knowledge they possessed, but in the wisdom of knowing when and how to share it. They were the silent guardians of Ireland's soul, and their role in the myth of the Salmon of Knowledge was a reminder that some secrets are too great to be known by any one person. Only when the time was right, only when the heart was pure enough, would the wisdom flow like the river, forever shaping the world around it. There is a place, hidden beneath the ancient hills of Ireland, where the earth breathes with the pulse of the world itself. The air is thick with mystery, and the ground seems to hum with the weight of forgotten stories. This place is known as Comla's Well, a sacred well that has stood since time itself began. It is not merely a pool of water, but a living doorway between the mortal world and the realm of the gods. And within its depths swims a creature unlike any other, the Salmon of Knowledge, whose very existence holds the wisdom of the ages. The well was not just a natural spring, it was a divine conduit, a meeting place between two worlds. The water was as clear as crystal, and yet, if you looked too closely, it would seem to twist and shimmer with visions of things that should not be seen. The wind would carry whispers, soft and fleeting, that you could never quite catch. These whispers, carried on the breeze, were the voices of the ancient gods themselves, echoing across time, their knowledge spilling into the water like tears from forgotten times. It was here that the Salmon of Knowledge resided, in the quiet depths of Comla's Well, beneath the rippling surface that glowed with a soft, otherworldly light. The fish, shimmering with silver scales that seemed to catch the light of the moon and stars alike, swam in the water's deepest recesses. But it was not just any salmon, it was the keeper of wisdom, the guardian of the secrets of the earth and the sky, the sea and the stars. The salmon had seen all things, every whisper of creation, every storm of destruction, every moment of joy and sorrow in the world. Its eyes, large and wise, reflected all that had been and all that would come. The well itself was a place of power. It was said that the water could heal the sick, restore the weak, and give strength to the weary. But its true power lay in its connection to the unseen world, the world that lay just beyond the veil of everyday life. The water was more than a physical substance, it was a mirror, a reflection of the deeper truths of existence. To look into Comla's Well was to look beyond time and space, to see the threads that wove the fabric of the universe itself. Those who sought the well, and the wisdom it held, knew it was not enough to simply gaze into the water. There was a price for such knowledge, and the well demanded more than a mere wish. It tested those who came before it, challenging their hearts and minds, asking them to prove themselves worthy of the wisdom that lay beneath its surface. Fionn MacCumhaill, in his quest for the Salmon of Knowledge, found himself standing before Comla's Well, the cool air heavy with the weight of destiny. The water lapped softly against the stones that surrounded the well, as if waiting for him to make his move. He could feel the pull of the salmon beneath the surface, calling him to it, but he also knew that reaching it would not be easy. The well was not just a place of power, it was a guardian of secrets. It would not give up its treasures easily, The deeper he looked into the water, the more he saw. The shimmering surface seemed to part for him, revealing glimpses of strange lands, places where the gods themselves walked, where the air buzzed with magic and the earth seemed alive with power. It was as though the well stretched beyond the confines of the world he knew, reaching into the realms of the unknown. But the more he saw, the more he realized that the salmon's wisdom was not simply there for the taking. The well had a will of its own, and only those who could prove their worth, those who could rise above their own desires, would be granted its secrets. Finn's heart beat faster, his hands trembling with the weight of what he was about to do. The salmon of knowledge was within his reach. But as his fingers brushed the water's surface, the well seemed to pull away from him, as if testing him. The water rippled, and in that ripple, he saw the faces of the gods. He saw Bibhin, Eriu, and Ain, the three sisters, their eyes full of wisdom, their voices silent but loud in their presence. They were the true guardians of the salmon's secret, and they watched him, not with judgment, but with an understanding that he was not yet ready. But Fionn did not step back. He had already crossed the line, already chosen his path. The well and the salmon would not easily give their secrets to anyone who was not worthy. Fionn knew that if he was to claim the wisdom that flowed like lifeblood through Cumhaill's well, he would have to face the trials that lay ahead. The air around him seemed to thicken, and the water grew still, as though the well itself was holding its breath. A soft, quiet voice filled his mind, a voice that seemed to echo not just in the well, but in the very air around him. "Only the purest heart may take what is offered," the voice whispered. "Only the one who seeks wisdom, not for power, but for the good of all, may gain the knowledge of the ages." Finn's gaze turned back to the water. He could see it now, clearer than ever, the salmon, swimming beneath the surface, its silver scales glistening in the light. He reached out again, this time with the certainty that only comes when a person knows their own heart. The well did not pull away this time. Instead, the water seemed to part for him, a small gap appearing in the water as though inviting him closer. With a single, decisive motion, Fionn plunged his hand into the water, feeling the cold, sharp bite of the liquid as it surrounded his fingers. And there, in the depths, he could feel the weight of the salmon, its ancient wisdom pulsing like a heartbeat against his skin. The connection was instant. Fionn felt the flood of knowledge enter his mind, the wisdom of the ages flowing through him. The world around him seemed to fade, the air growing thick with the power of the well, and for a moment, he understood everything, the very nature of the earth, the stars, the wind, and the rain. It was as if the well had opened a door to all the mysteries of the world, and he had walked through it. And with that wisdom came a deep understanding of the burden it carried, because knowledge, true knowledge, is never a light gift. Fionn pulled his hand from the water, breathless, his body shaking from the power of the experience. The water closed behind him, as if nothing had ever happened, but Fionn knew that something deep within him had changed. The salmon had granted him its wisdom, but it had also left him with a question, one that would stay with him forever. What will you do with the knowledge you now hold? Cumhaill's well stood silent, as it always had, its waters flowing endlessly through time. But for Fionn, the world would never be the same again. The air was thick with ancient power, the kind of quiet that settles over places too old for time to remember. Cumhaill's well, nestled in the heart of Ireland, stood as it always had, untouched by the passing of centuries. It was not just a well, it was a living, breathing entity, a place where the veil between this world and the next seemed to tremble, thin and fragile. Those who came to its banks were not merely looking for water. They came seeking something far greater, something older than memory. The well was not just a pool, it was a passage, a gateway, a doorway to knowledge that lay hidden beneath the surface. The waters of Cumhaill's well were still, yet they seemed to pulse with energy, as if each drop carried within it the echo of forgotten worlds. Its depths were endless, or so it seemed to those who dared to peer into its murky depths. It was said that no matter how far you reached, no matter how deep you tried to look, the water would always conceal its ultimate secret. The stillness of the well was deceiving. It held not silence, but wisdom, vast and infinite, the kind that could break a man, lift him to greatness, or drown him in despair. The legend spoke of the Salmon of Knowledge, a creature whose scales glimmered like the stars themselves, whose very existence was entwined with the wisdom of the earth. It was said that the salmon swam within Comla's well, a constant guardian of the knowledge that flowed beneath the surface. The water, with its quiet power, was the perfect home for such a creature, hidden, eternal, untouched. And yet, the salmon was not alone. It was the keeper of the well's secrets, and within its silver body, the wisdom of the world waited, waiting for the one who was worthy enough to claim it. Those who sought the well came with hearts full of hope and minds full of dreams, yet none could approach the water lightly. The well was not a place to be trifled with. It was said that the well had no interest in those who sought its knowledge for selfish reasons, for power, or for glory. The water cared little for the fame of those who came to it. What mattered was the heart, whether it was pure enough, whether it was strong enough to bear the weight of the wisdom that it could offer. Only those with a heart full of sincerity could hope to gain even a glimpse of the knowledge that lay beneath the water's calm surface. It was said that Fionn MacCumhaill, brave and determined, came to Comla's well on a day like no other. He stood at the edge, his eyes reflecting the stillness of the water, the wind stirring his hair, but there was something in the air that felt alive, as though the very world around him was holding its breath. He could feel the pull of the water, the weight of what lay within it, calling to him. But he knew that the well was not a place to take lightly. It had its own will, its own rhythm, and the water would not bend to his desires unless he was worthy. He knelt beside the well, the earth beneath him soft, cool, and ancient. The world seemed to hush, and for a brief moment, time itself appeared to pause, as though it was waiting for something, a sign, a signal, a moment of truth. Fionn felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This was no simple quest. To drink from the waters of Comla's well, to claim the knowledge of the salmon, was to carry the burden of all that had come before and all that was yet to come. It was a responsibility like no other. Fionn hesitated, his breath steady as he looked into the water. The surface was like glass, reflecting not only the sky above, but also the shifting shadows of another world, one that seemed distant, unreachable, yet so close that he could feel its pulse in his bones. He knew that beneath the surface, somewhere deep, the salmon of knowledge was waiting. But it wasn't just the fish that intrigued him. It was the well itself, its quiet power, the way it seemed to whisper of things that had happened long before he was born and would continue long after he was gone. The well was more than a place. It was a threshold. A place where the physical and the spiritual collided, where the boundary between the known and the unknown blurred. It was a reminder that there were forces in this world far greater than man, far older than the very soil beneath his feet. The well was a passage, one that could open doors to forgotten lands, reveal hidden truths, or cast the seeker into a world they were not ready to face. The water of Comla's well was not something to be taken lightly. It was both a gift and a trial, a challenge to those who sought it, testing them in ways they could never anticipate. Fionn's hand trembled as he reached out toward the water, his fingers brushing the cool surface. It felt like touching the pulse of the earth itself, the beat of all things that lived and died, that rose and fell. The water rippled at his touch, and for a moment, he could almost hear the quiet hum of voices, ancient and distant. They were not human voices, but something older, more powerful, gods, perhaps, or spirits of the land. The voice of the earth itself. They spoke not in words, but in feelings, and images, and emotions that surged through him. He could see the salmon, silver and bright, swimming in the depths of the well, its form shifting like the light on the surface of the water. Its eyes glowed with an ancient wisdom, knowing all that had been, all that was, and all that would ever be. Fionn could feel the weight of its gaze, as if the salmon saw through him, looking into the depths of his soul, measuring his worth. But there was more than just the fish. The well was a living thing, a conduit between the world of men and the world of the divine. It was said that to drink from its waters was to step into the flow of time itself, to feel the pulse of creation, and to see beyond the veil of reality. Fionn knew that what he was about to do was not just about the knowledge of the salmon, it was about understanding the very nature of the world, the way all things were connected, the way everything in existence was part of a larger whole. The wind whispered through the trees, the soft sound of leaves rustling like the murmurs of spirits. Fionn's heart pounded in his chest as he gazed into the water, knowing that once he drank, once he claimed the wisdom of the well, nothing would ever be the same. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, the responsibility that came with such knowledge. The water was calm, but its depths were anything but. They were vast, endless, and full of things that no man was truly ready to understand. And yet, Fionn knew there was no turning back. The well had called him, and he had answered. The hunger for knowledge is a fire that burns brighter than any mortal desire. It does not ask for rest, nor does it bow to time. It drives men to great feats, pushes them beyond the limits of the world they know, and compels them to seek answers to questions that are often too dangerous to ask. In Ireland's ancient stories, few were as driven by this hunger as the legendary heroes, Fionn MacCumhaill and Cuchulainn among them, each yearning to grasp the wisdom that would make them great, that would set them apart from the rest of humanity. The wind was sharp that day when Fionn first heard of the Salmon of Knowledge. It whispered through the trees like a secret too powerful to keep, like the promise of something greater than any treasure. The stories told of a creature whose mere consumption of its flesh could bestow the wisdom of the world upon those worthy enough to partake. It was not just the taste of the salmon that beckoned, it was the gift of insight, the power to see beyond the veil, to understand the workings of the universe. For Fionn, who had always been destined for greatness, the thought of such a gift was irresistible. He could feel its pull deep in his bones, a sensation as if his heart beat in rhythm with the world's own. But Fionn was not the only one to feel this hunger. Cuchulainn, a warrior with the heart of a lion and the mind of a sage, too heard of the salmon. Unlike Fionn, who often followed the paths of prophecy and fate, Cuchulainn was driven by his unyielding desire to prove himself. A hunger burned in him, not for fame or glory, but for understanding. For the greatest warriors were not only skilled in battle, they understood the world around them. To gain wisdom was to control not only oneself but the forces that shaped the world. Fionn and Cuchulainn were not the only ones. Throughout Irish myth, many heroes and sages sought the salmon, drawn not by the promises of power but by the thirst for something more, the kind of wisdom that could turn a man's fate, that could lift the veil between life and death, between the mortal world and the realm of gods. It was a knowledge that went beyond the sword, beyond the shield, a deeper knowledge that lay in the mysteries of the world itself. The pursuit of wisdom in Irish mythology is not a simple quest. It is not just about gaining an advantage over enemies, nor is it about the glory of being the wisest or the most knowledgeable. It is about understanding the great balance that holds the world together. The wisdom of the salmon was not just intellectual, it was spiritual, tying the seekers to the land, to the sky, to the sea. It was a gift that demanded not just intelligence but humility, selflessness, and the willingness to bear the weight of knowledge. It was a gift that could shape a man or break him, depending on how he chose to wield it. As Fionn and Cuchulainn ventured towards Comhla's well, the place where the Salmon of Knowledge resided, the path was never simple. The journey was fraught with trials, each step a challenge to their hearts, their minds, and their spirits. But they knew there could be no turning back. The call of the salmon was too strong, the pull of its wisdom too overwhelming. Both warriors, though so different in their ways, understood one thing: the pursuit of wisdom would test them in ways they could not yet comprehend. When Fionn arrived at the well, he stood for a long time, watching the waters ripple, sensing the weight of the moment. The quiet of the well was both peaceful and unnerving. It was not just a pool of water, it was a space where the unknown gathered, where the walls between the worlds thinned. The silence pressed in on him, and in it, he could hear the whispers of ages, the voices of those who had sought this same wisdom. He could almost hear their words, their questions, their fears. Each hero who had stood where he stood had asked the same thing: what will I do with the knowledge I gain? For wisdom was a burden, not a gift. Cuchulainn, too, felt the weight of the journey when he arrived at the well. Though his body was strong and his will unshakable, it was in moments like these, standing at the edge of such power, that even the mightiest warrior must pause. The air was thick with the tension of decision, the weight of a path not yet taken. He could feel the presence of the salmon, swimming silently in the depths, its wisdom just beyond his reach. The well seemed to pulse with energy, as though testing his worth, measuring his heart. Both men, in their own way, understood that the salmon would not give up its wisdom freely. It was not a gift to be taken lightly, nor was it something to be consumed without consequence. For the knowledge it offered would change them forever. It would shape their thoughts, their actions, and their very souls. The quest for the Salmon of Knowledge was not about what they could gain, but about what they could become. Wisdom was not merely something to be used, it was a living thing, a force that could either elevate or destroy, depending on how it was wielded. In the stories of Fionn and Cuchulainn and countless others, the search for the salmon is a metaphor for the constant human quest for understanding. It is a reflection of the inner hunger we all feel at times, the desire to know the truth, to see the world for what it truly is, to understand the forces that shape our lives and our fates. It is a hunger that does not fade with time, that does not cease when the answers are found. It burns in the hearts of those who seek knowledge, and it carries with it the weight of responsibility. Finn's encounter with the salmon, the moment when he took that fateful bite, was not one of triumph, but of transformation. He gained wisdom, yes, but it came with a price. The weight of knowing the future, seeing the invisible threads that bind all things together, would forever change his path. The world he once knew, the battles he fought, the people he loved, they all took on new meaning. No longer could he look at them with the same eyes. The wisdom of the salmon is not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that forces a man to confront the truth of existence, of suffering, and of joy. Cuchulainn's pursuit of the salmon was not to be left behind. His battle was not with enemies on a battlefield, but with the knowledge that would change him, that would mold his fate. The wisdom he sought would give him the strength to face the challenges ahead, but it would also burden him with an understanding of the world's darker truths. His quest was not one of simple glory, it was one that would define him for the rest of his life. For both men, the quest for the salmon was more than a search for power. It was an odyssey of the soul, a journey toward understanding, one that would shape them forever, filling the emptiness with something more profound than they could have imagined. And in their hunger for wisdom, they would find not just answers, but the very essence of what it means to be human. The fire crackled, its warmth filling the quiet space where the druids gathered, their faces etched with years of wisdom. The flames' flicker cast long shadows on the ancient stone walls, a reminder of times so old that even the oldest trees had not yet taken root. Outside, the night was still, the air thick with the kind of silence that only comes when the earth itself seems to hold its breath. The druids knew this silence well. It was the quiet of the world waiting for the next story, the next hero, the next spark of knowledge that would light the way for those who were ready to see it. In the flickering light of their sacred fires, the druids were more than just wise men. They were the keepers of secrets, the guardians of a knowledge that spanned the ages, passed down from one generation to the next. Their connection to the gods was something sacred, unspoken, but ever-present. They were the bridge between the human world and the divine, the ones who could see the unseen and hear the voices of the gods, who lived among men but never truly belonged to them. The gods, in turn, spoke to the druids not in words, but in visions and signs, in the very natural world that surrounded them, the wind, the trees, the water, and the creatures that lived within it. The Salmon of Knowledge was one such divine secret. The druids knew of its existence long before heroes like Fionn MacCumhaill sought it. They had seen its power, its wisdom, and the ways in which it tied the world together. The salmon was not just a creature of the water, it was a living symbol of the knowledge that flowed through the land. It was a guardian, a keeper of secrets, its silver scales glistening with the wisdom of the world. And the druids, with their deep connection to the mysteries of nature and the gods, were the only ones who truly understood the weight of that knowledge. For the druids, the pursuit of wisdom was not just about learning. It was about understanding the delicate balance of all things, the way the stars in the sky above connected to the earth below. They saw the world not as a series of separate events, but as a web, each thread intertwined with the next, each one affecting the others. And the salmon, with its silent journey through the deep, dark waters, was the living embodiment of that web, a creature that carried the wisdom of the universe within its very being. As young Fionn stood before the druids for the first time, he felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. He was a boy still, eager to prove himself, to show the world what he was capable of. But the druids were not like the warriors or the kings he had known. They did not seek strength through the sword, nor did they look for glory in battle. Their power was different, quiet, enduring, unshakable. It was the kind of power that could not be measured by victories, but by the wisdom one carried, the way one moved through the world. The Druids had seen something in Fionn, something special. They knew that the boy had the potential to be great, to become one of the greatest heroes the world had ever known. But to reach that greatness, he had to understand the deeper truths that lay hidden in the world. He had to learn how to listen, not just with his ears, but with his heart, with his soul. The Salmon of Knowledge was a part of this, a symbol of the wisdom Fionn had to seek. But the Druids understood that the boy could not simply take the knowledge, he had to be ready for it. He had to be shaped by it, tempered like steel in the fire. The training Fionn underwent under the watchful eyes of the Druids was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was not just about learning to wield a sword or to fight in battle. It was about learning to understand the world around him, to see the patterns in nature, to hear the whispers of the gods in the wind, to recognize the signs that the earth offered to those who were wise enough to look. The Druids taught Fionn how to connect with the natural world, how to read the movements of the stars, how to understand the language of the trees and the rivers. But more than that, they taught him to look within. They showed him how to quiet his mind, how to still the storms within his heart, so that he could hear the voice of the Salmon of Knowledge when the time came. The knowledge was not something that could be grasped with force or with arrogance. It was something that could only be obtained with patience, with humility, and with a deep respect for the mysteries of the world. Fionn was a boy of great ambition, and yet he knew that there was a greater wisdom than his own. He felt it when he stood by the fire with the Druids, felt it when the wind whispered his name through the trees, felt it when the earth seemed to hum beneath his feet. The knowledge he sought was not about conquering the world, but about understanding it, about becoming one with the forces that shaped all life. One of the most important lessons the Druids taught Fionn was how to see the divine in everything. They showed him that the gods were not distant, unreachable beings, but were part of every stone, every stream, every leaf that rustled in the wind. They were present in the world around him, and they could be seen if only one knew how to look. And in the Salmon of Knowledge, they saw the divine reflected in its shimmering scales, in its quiet wisdom, in the way it swam through the currents of time, carrying with it the knowledge of the ages. Fionn spent years with the Druids, learning not just how to be a hero, but how to be a wise man, a man who could understand the deeper meaning of the world. The lessons were not easy, and there were times when Fionn doubted himself, when he felt the weight of his own impatience pressing down on him. He was ready for battle, ready for glory, but the Druids understood that wisdom could not be rushed. It was a slow burn, a steady flame that would light the way in its own time. And all the while, the Salmon of Knowledge swam in Comla's well, waiting for the right moment, for the right person to come and claim it. The Druids knew that the time would come when Fionn would be ready, when he would be worthy of the knowledge the salmon held within its depths. But until that moment, the boy had to grow, had to learn, had to understand the true meaning of wisdom. The gods would not give their secrets to those who sought them for the wrong reasons. They would only give them to those whose hearts were pure, whose spirits were ready to bear the weight of what they would learn. In the quiet of the Druidic fires, Fionn understood that the knowledge he sought was not something to be taken lightly. It was something to be earned, something that would change him forever. And when the time came, he would be ready, not because of his strength, but because of the wisdom that the Druids had helped him cultivate. He would be worthy of the salmon's knowledge, not because he was the greatest warrior, but because he had learned to listen, to understand, and to respect the world in all its mysteries. The rain poured down in sheets, drumming against the earth in a rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of Fionn MacCumhaill's heart. His small feet splashed through the muddy banks of the river, his eyes wide with wonder, unaware of the future that awaited him. His childhood, though marked by hardship, was rich with moments of discovery and quiet awe, moments that would shape him into the hero he would one day become. Fionn was not born into a world of peace. His earliest memories were of struggle, of running through the woods with his mother, of the feeling of her protective arms around him as they fled from those who would harm them. The son of the great warrior Cumhaill, Fionn's life began as one of exile. His father was killed in battle, and as a child, Fionn lived with the shadow of that loss hanging over him. But it was through these trials that the seeds of greatness were planted. He was not a boy to be broken by the past. No, he was a boy who would rise from it, like a flame rising from the ashes. Raised by his mother, Fionn learned early that there was more to life than strength and swordplay. She taught him the value of wisdom, of patience, and of understanding the world around him. But it was in the hands of the Druids that Fionn began to understand the true nature of his destiny. His connection to the Druids was more than just an education, it was a spiritual bond, one that connected him to the very forces that shaped the earth, the wind, and the sky. The Druids were not just wise men, they were the keepers of secrets, the guardians of knowledge that had been passed down since time immemorial. It was the Druid Finnegas who first took Fionn under his wing, guiding him through the complexities of the world and the deeper mysteries of life. Finnegas was not just any Druid. He was a man of great power and wisdom, a man whose very presence seemed to hold the weight of the ages. He had spent years, decades even, in search of the Salmon of Knowledge, seeking to understand the deeper truths of existence, hoping that the wisdom of the ages would flow into him through the simple act of eating the fish. But it was not just the knowledge that Finnegas sought, it was the connection to the world itself, the understanding of the hidden currents that flowed beneath the surface of things. For Fionn, being in the presence of such a man was both awe-inspiring and humbling. The Druid did not speak of the world in simple terms. He spoke of the stars, of the moon, of the winds that swept across the land, and of the rivers that carried the stories of the earth in their currents. Finnegas taught Fionn that knowledge was not simply about facts, it was about understanding the rhythm of life, the way that everything in the world was connected. It was about learning to listen to the silence between the words, to feel the pulse of the earth beneath your feet, and to understand that all things, even the smallest creatures, had a role to play in the great story of the world. Under Finnegas's guidance, Fionn learned that wisdom did not come easily. It was a slow, patient process. The mind must be opened like a door, one that could not be rushed or forced open by mere strength. Fionn spent many hours by the fire, listening to the Druid stories, watching the flames dance in the quiet night, and letting the words sink deep into his soul. There were moments when Fionn felt as though he was hearing something more than just stories. He felt as though he was hearing the very heartbeat of the world, pulsing in time with his own. But it was not just through the words of the Druid that Fionn came to understand the world. It was in the quiet moments, the ones that did not make the legends, when Fionn felt something stir inside him. He would sit by the river's edge, listening to the rush of the water as it carried the secrets of the world, feeling the cool breeze on his face, and seeing the way the world seemed to come alive in the twilight hours. The trees whispered their ancient knowledge to him, and the winds carried with them stories from the past, from heroes long gone. Fionn knew that these moments were the key to understanding everything, the way the world turned, the way the earth breathed, the way life and death were linked in a dance that could not be broken. And yet, despite all that he had learned, Fionn still hungered for more. He was a young man, full of ambition and fire, and while he respected the wisdom of the Druids, he still felt the stirring of his warrior's heart. He knew that wisdom alone would not make him a great man, it was strength and courage that would define his place in the world. But there was something inside him that whispered that perhaps the two, wisdom and strength, were not so separate after all. Perhaps true strength lay not just in the sword, but in the mind, in the heart, and in the ability to understand the world around him. It was during this time that Fionn had his first real encounter with the Salmon of Knowledge. He had heard the stories, of course, the legends passed down by the Druids and the elders of his tribe. The salmon was said to hold the wisdom of the world, to possess the knowledge of the gods themselves. But Fionn did not understand, not yet. He did not know what it truly meant to seek the salmon, to desire its wisdom. He only knew that something deep inside him called out for it. As Fionn sat by the river, the same river that had seen so many legends unfold, he saw a movement in the water. It was subtle, but it was there, a flash of silver, a gleam that caught the light in such a way that it seemed almost unreal. It was then that Fionn understood, the salmon was real. It was not just a myth. It was a living, breathing being, and it had the answers that Fionn sought. But it was not the kind of knowledge that could be gained easily. It was a wisdom that came at a price, a wisdom that demanded something in return. The fire in Fionn's heart burned hotter than ever before. The boy who had once been exiled, the boy who had grown up in the shadows of giants, now felt the stirrings of his own greatness. He had learned from the Druids, learned from Finnegas, but there was more to learn. There was more to see. And the salmon, shimmering in the depths of the river, held the key. But Fionn also understood something else. Knowledge was not something to be taken lightly. It was not just power to be wielded, but a responsibility to be carried. The wisdom of the salmon would change him forever. It would shape his destiny, for better or for worse. He had learned from Finnegas that wisdom was a gift, but it was also a burden. And he was ready to bear it. Under the watchful eye of the Druid, Fionn's heart swelled with the understanding that his life was about to change. The boy who had once been lost, unsure of his place in the world, now stood on the precipice of something greater. The salmon of knowledge awaited him, its wisdom ready to flow into him like the river's waters, and with it, Fionn would begin the path that would shape him into one of the greatest heroes of all time. The sky hung heavy with clouds, the air thick with the scent of rain that had not yet fallen. Fionn stood at the edge of the great river, its waters rushing swiftly, carrying with them secrets that had existed for as long as time itself. His heart was pounding, his body tense with anticipation. Somewhere in these waters, somewhere beyond the reeds and swirling currents, the salmon of knowledge swam. He could feel its presence, like a whisper against the back of his mind, a quiet call that tugged at him. But the river was vast, and the fish was elusive. Fionn wasn't the first to seek the salmon. He knew that. The druid Finnegas had spent 7 long years trying to catch it, and yet the fish remained just out of reach, as though it were forever slipping through his grasp. Fionn could almost hear the quiet murmurs of the druids that had come before, their voices speaking of the fish in hushed tones, reverent and awestruck. They spoke of the salmon with the same kind of longing that one speaks of a distant star, beautiful, unreachable, and full of ancient power. But unlike those who had come before him, Fionn felt something different stirring inside him. He wasn't merely chasing the fish for knowledge or power. There was something more. Something deeper. A sense that this moment was written in the fabric of fate itself. The wind shifted suddenly, and Fionn heard the rustle of leaves behind him. He turned to see the figure of Finnegas, standing tall and silent, his eyes filled with the weight of years spent in pursuit of the salmon. The druid's robes flowed around him like the very earth itself, and his presence seemed to command the forest to stillness. It was clear that Finnegas had seen much, learned much, and yet the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. 7 years. 7 long years of watching, waiting, and hoping that the salmon would reveal itself, yet it had remained elusive. Fionn understood that, in a way, Finnegas was not just seeking the salmon for himself, but for all of them. The druid was a keeper of wisdom, and the salmon held the answers to questions that spanned the generations. "You seek it as well," Finnegas said, his voice low, but not unkind. "You have felt it, haven't you? The pull of the river, the call of the salmon? It speaks to all who are destined for greatness." Fionn nodded, his heart racing. "Yes," he whispered. "I can hear it. It calls to me." Finnegas studied him for a long moment, his face unreadable. "The salmon does not reveal itself easily, Fionn MacCumhaill. It has its reasons, its own will. Many have tried to catch it, and many have failed. You must understand that knowledge, true knowledge, is not something that can be obtained without a price." Fionn stood taller, his jaw set with determination. He had already paid a price. The road to this moment had not been easy, and he knew the price of wisdom was never light. Yet, the desire burned in him like a fire that could not be quenched. "I am ready." Finnegas didn't answer immediately. He merely nodded and stepped aside, gesturing to the river with a slow, deliberate motion. "Then you must trust in the path before you. The salmon waits, but it does not wait forever." Fionn's eyes followed the river's course, the rushing water twisting and turning as it seemed to move with a purpose all its own. Somewhere beneath those depths, the salmon swam, a creature of mystery and power. But Fionn understood now that the salmon was not just an animal, it was a symbol of something greater. It was a key, and it could only be unlocked by those who were worthy. The prophecy, though not often spoken of, was something Fionn had heard in his childhood. It spoke of a boy born of great blood, destined to find the salmon and with it, unlock the wisdom of the world. The salmon would guide him, but it would not be easy. There would be trials, moments of doubt, and darkness. But the boy, if he was true of heart, would succeed where others had failed. It was this prophecy that haunted Finnegas, though he spoke of it only in whispers. For years, the druid had believed that the time was not yet right. The salmon had eluded him, its wisdom too powerful to be possessed by someone who had not yet earned it. But Fionn, with his youthful fire and hunger for truth, was different. There was something in him that resonated with the ancient magic of the world, something that made the winds shift when he passed. Finnegas could see that now. Fionn was more than just a boy on a quest. He was the boy foretold in the prophecies, the one who would bridge the gap between the gods and the men, between the known and the unknown. The druid's voice broke the stillness once more. There are many paths in this life, Fionn. Some of them are bright and easy to follow. But the path you stand on now is dark and winding. The salmon does not give up its secrets lightly. But if you are meant to find it, you will know how to navigate these waters. You must trust in the signs, and the divine guidance that will lead you to the fish. Fionn's mind raced as he absorbed the weight of the words. Divine guidance. The salmon wasn't just a fish, it was a guide, a messenger from the gods themselves. It wasn't about strength or speed, it was about understanding, patience, and the ability to listen to the quiet whispers of the world around him. Fionn knew that now. He knew that if he wanted the salmon's wisdom, he would need to be attuned to the world's deeper currents. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the forest in shades of gold and crimson, Fionn could feel the call of the salmon growing stronger. The water seemed to hum with energy, the very air around him crackling with a magic he could almost touch. The path was not clear, but Fionn's heart knew what it had to do. He had the druid's blessing, and now he had to take the next step, alone. With one last glance at Finnegas, Fionn waded into the river. The current tugged at his feet, but his resolve was stronger. He would find the salmon. He had no doubt. The river would guide him, and the wisdom that awaited him would shape his destiny. The chase was on. The river Boyne stretched out before Fionn, its waters running swift and cold, cutting through the land like a thread of fate itself. The day was still, the air thick with anticipation. All around him, the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself knew the significance of the moment. Fionn stood at the edge, the weight of the prophecy heavy on his shoulders. The Salmon of Knowledge swam somewhere beneath the surface, elusive and untouchable to all who had come before him. Yet now, at this moment, Fionn could feel its presence, as real as the pounding of his own heart. It called to him, pulling him closer, urging him to take the next step. For a long time, Fionn had wondered what this moment would feel like, when the prophecy would finally unfold before him, when the salmon would finally reveal itself to him. Now, standing at the river's edge, he could almost taste it. The waters, dark and mysterious, hid the creature that held the wisdom of the ages. It was said that the salmon could only be caught by those who were meant to receive its knowledge, and in that moment, Fionn felt a certainty deep within him. He was meant for this. He steadied himself, his breath slow and measured, his fingers brushing the rough handle of the spear that he held in his hand. It wasn't the weapon that mattered, it was the belief, the trust in himself and in the divine guidance that had brought him here. He glanced over at the druids who had followed him to the riverbank, their faces unreadable, their silent gazes focused on the waters. Finnegas stood among them, his eyes filled with an emotion that was both pride and sorrow, as if he knew what was about to happen but also understood the cost that would come with it. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Everything had led to this moment. Fionn could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the pull of fate wrapping around him like a chain, drawing him closer to the salmon. It wasn't just a fish, it was the key to a world of knowledge that could shape the future of Ireland itself. The wisdom of the gods, of the ancient world, was about to be placed in his hands. But what would it mean? Would the knowledge be a blessing, or would it come with a burden that would be impossible to bear? Fionn's eyes locked onto the water, scanning the surface, searching for any sign of movement. The river Boyne whispered to him, its waters calling out, beckoning him to enter its depths. The Druidic teachings he had learned, the lessons of patience and listening to the rhythms of nature, echoed in his mind. The salmon was not to be caught through brute strength or force. It would only reveal itself to those who were worthy, those who understood the delicate balance of fate and free will. Time seemed to stretch, and for a long moment, Fionn stood still, his body poised, his mind in perfect silence. And then, there it was, beneath the surface, a flicker of movement, a gleam of silver that reflected the sun as it danced beneath the rushing water. It was the salmon. Finn's heart leaped within his chest, but his hand remained steady, his eyes never leaving the creature as it swam just out of reach. The ritual was simple, yet profound. He had been taught the ways of the Druids, their sacred rites and their connection to the forces of nature. He knew that this was not a moment to rush. The salmon would not be caught in haste. Instead, it would come to him when the time was right. He took a slow step forward, his feet sinking into the cool earth, and with each movement, the world around him seemed to slow. The river seemed to hum with energy, a rhythm that Fionn had to match, a flow that he had to enter. He held his breath as he stepped closer to the water, his fingers tightening around the spear. The salmon darted forward, glistening like a streak of light beneath the surface. Finn's heart raced, but his movements were calm, deliberate. He had only one chance. This was the moment that would change everything. With a fluid motion, he thrust the spear into the water. The salmon leapt, its scales shimmering like liquid silver, but it was no longer untouchable. The tip of Finn's spear found its mark, and the fish, the elusive creature that had evaded so many before him, was caught. The world seemed to hold its breath as Fionn drew the salmon from the water, its body gleaming with an almost otherworldly light. The sound of the river, the wind in the trees, the rustling of the leaves, all of it seemed to fade away, leaving only the presence of the creature in Finn's hands. He could feel the weight of it, the power it carried. This was no ordinary fish, it was a vessel of knowledge, of wisdom that had been guarded by the gods and the Druids for generations. Finn's heart beat faster, and he could almost hear the voice of the gods in his mind, whispering words of warning and of promise. The salmon was not just a gift, it was a responsibility. A weight he would carry for the rest of his life. He had caught it, yes, but what would he do with the knowledge it offered? Would he use it for good, to protect the land and its people? Or would he be tempted by the power that knowledge could bring, the power to shape fate itself? As the salmon lay in his hands, its eyes seemed to lock with his, and in that moment, Fionn felt the full weight of the universe upon him. The knowledge the salmon carried was not a gift to be taken lightly. It was not just about the future of Ireland, it was about the future of all things, of the balance between gods and men, fate and free will. The power of the salmon was vast, and with it came the burden of understanding the world in ways that few could comprehend. But Fionn didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. His gaze never left the creature as it lay in his hands, the weight of its knowledge pressing against his soul. He had caught the salmon, but it was not the catch that mattered, it was what he would do with it now. Would he be the hero the prophecies foretold, or would he be consumed by the very wisdom he had sought? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, the world had changed, and with it, Finn's place in it. Finn's hands shook as he held the gleaming salmon of knowledge in his grasp, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The water of the river Boyne seemed to swirl around his feet as he stood there, frozen, the world narrowing to this one simple, yet momentous task. He had done it. He had caught the elusive salmon that so many had sought before him, and now its shimmering scales rested in his palms like an offering from the gods. The air around him was thick with expectation, as if the earth itself waited to see what he would do next. The salmon, now a prize of immeasurable worth, was not just a symbol of triumph, it was a source of wisdom, a vessel that held the knowledge of the ages. Fionn knew this, and yet, as his fingers brushed the fish's cool, slippery body, something deep within him stirred. There was a pull, a gentle whisper in his mind, urging him to understand what the salmon truly represented. This was not a moment to rush, not a moment for careless actions. But as his eyes met the fish's steady gaze, something in him shifted. A temptation flickered, a hunger that was deeper than the need to conquer. He had heard the stories. He had learned the ancient warnings. The salmon of knowledge was not to be consumed lightly. Those who ate its flesh were said to gain unparalleled wisdom, to see the world in ways that mere mortals could not. But such a gift came with a price. There was always a price. Yet in that moment, with the creature lying before him, Finn's hunger for wisdom eclipsed the warnings. Without thinking, he took a piece of the fish's flesh, the tender, glistening meat that seemed to almost hum with energy. His teeth sank into the soft, delicate skin, and the taste exploded in his mouth. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced, warmth and cold intertwined, the taste both foreign and familiar, as though the flavors of the earth itself were being imprinted on his very soul. And then, it happened. A sudden, sharp clarity pierced through Finn's mind. It was as though the very essence of the universe had opened to him, flooding his senses with knowledge beyond measure. The world shifted in ways he could not explain. He saw the faces of the ancient gods, their eyes full of secrets, their voices echoing with wisdom. He felt the pulse of the land beneath him, the rhythm of the earth as it turned, the breath of the wind as it whispered its ancient stories. His body, rooted to the ground, seemed to dissolve into the very fabric of creation itself. Time, space, and existence, everything became one. The knowledge wasn't just about the past, it was the future, too. Finn saw flashes of distant battles, victories and losses, heroes and villains, all dancing in the threads of fate like actors upon a stage. He understood the delicate balance between life and death, light and darkness. He saw the choices he would face, the paths that would lead him to glory or despair. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, the knowledge of how much was at stake. The gods had chosen him, but they had also entrusted him with their most precious gift, understanding. For a moment, he wanted to close his eyes, to escape the overwhelming flood of visions that washed over him. But he couldn't. He couldn't look away, even if he wanted to. The knowledge was too powerful, too all-encompassing. It held him in its grip, not as a prisoner, but as one chosen to carry its burden. He understood things about the world that no man should ever know, and yet, paradoxically, it felt like he had always known them. His mind raced, trying to comprehend the scope of it all, but it was as if the very concept of understanding had expanded beyond the limitations of his human mind. The voices of the gods were louder now, as if they were speaking directly to him, their words a cascade of understanding. "You have tasted the flesh of knowledge," they whispered, their voices both kind and stern. "You will never be the same. You are no longer just a man, you are a vessel for the wisdom of the ages. Do not let it consume you, for you must now walk a path that few can tread. Your choices will shape the fate of this land." Finn staggered back, his legs weak beneath him. The world around him was no longer as it had been. It was as though the very air had thickened, the land had shifted. He could see the thoughts of the druids around him, Finnegas, standing silently, his face unreadable, the other figures watching, waiting. But Finn could see beyond them now. He could see into their hearts, the doubts and fears that lay hidden, the longings and hopes they had never spoken aloud. It was overwhelming. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. He could feel the weight of the salmon's gift pressing upon him, and for the first time, he realized just how much he had given up to taste it. There was a price, after all. Wisdom, in its purest form, was not just a blessing, it was a burden. Finn had become something more, something beyond what he had ever imagined. But with that transformation came a sharp realization: he was no longer the man he had been. The wisdom of the salmon had altered him in ways he could not yet fully understand. And yet, as the knowledge settled deep within him, Finn knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same. The salmon had given him a gift that would change the course of history, but it had also set him on a path that no one could predict. The world he now saw was full of infinite possibilities, and with each step he took, he would have to make choices, choices that could save or destroy, choices that could shape the future of all things. His gaze turned to the sky, his heart beating faster, as if the very heavens were watching him, waiting. The taste of the salmon lingered on his tongue, its power coursing through his veins, and Finn understood, for the first time in his life, that he was no longer simply a boy with dreams. He was something far greater. Something destined. The weight of the salmon's wisdom sat heavy within Fionn. The air around him had changed since he tasted the flesh, charged, as though the world itself was aware of the shift inside him. His mind, once simple and eager, was now filled with a vastness he could barely understand. The wisdom was all-encompassing, swirling in his thoughts like an ocean, every wave bringing with it an answer, a revelation, a truth. But the clarity that had flooded him in that moment now felt almost oppressive, a storm of knowledge that threatened to overwhelm him. He stood in the quiet of the woods, the trees around him swaying in the breeze, the same breeze that now seemed to whisper to him. It spoke not with words, but with a deep, ancient language that he could now understand. The song of the birds, the rustling of the leaves, they were not just sounds anymore. They were voices, each one carrying a meaning, a story. It was as though he could hear everything, every tree, every animal, every soul. The earth itself seemed to hum with life, its secrets unfolding before him. But as much as the knowledge was a gift, it was also a burden. The world he once knew now felt like a shadow, a mere reflection of the truth he had come to understand. Fionn could see the threads that bound everything together, the past, the present, the future. He could see how every action, every choice, rippled through time, changing the course of everything. The gift of foresight was both a blessing and a curse. He could see the battles to come, the heroes that would rise, the blood that would be spilled. He saw faces, names, moments that would define the world. And yet, despite the flood of images, there was no escape from the weight of it all. He saw darkness, too. He saw the shadow of the enemy looming over the land, the betrayal, the loss. His heart clenched as the future unfolded before him, revealing pain and suffering that he could not prevent. He saw the loss of friends, the destruction of homes, the fall of kingdoms. There were moments of hope, of light, but they were fleeting, swallowed by the darkness that always followed. It was as though the light and the dark were forever locked in a dance, each pulling at the other, neither able to truly defeat the other. The truth hit him with such force that it made him stagger. The power to know, to understand everything, was not freedom, it was a prison. The more he knew, the more he felt trapped by the weight of it. The future was no longer a mystery to him, but a looming certainty. There was no escaping it, no turning away. Fionn had become a part of the endless cycle of fate, a pawn to forces far greater than he had ever imagined. And with this new vision came the understanding of the choices he would have to make. Every decision he would face now carried the burden of knowing the consequences, both the good and the bad. Could he change the future? Or was he simply bound to follow the path laid out before him? Could he bear the responsibility of his newfound power, or would it consume him? The weight of the salmon's wisdom was more than he had ever anticipated. He had thought of it as a gift, a key to greatness, but now he saw it for what it truly was, a chain, binding him to the gods, to fate, to the world. He could no longer be the carefree boy he had been. He was a man now, shaped by knowledge, by the understanding of the fragile balance between light and dark. As he walked through the woods, each step felt heavier than the last. The path before him seemed clear, but it was also filled with obstacles he had never noticed before. Every shadow held a meaning, every rustle in the trees a message. He had become attuned to the world, able to see the truth hidden beneath its surface. But with this awareness came a deep sorrow. How could one man carry such knowledge? How could anyone? Fionn found himself at the edge of a clearing, the sun beginning to set in the distance. The sky was painted with streaks of red and gold, a reflection of the battle between light and dark that raged inside him. He closed his eyes, taking in the peace of the moment, the quiet beauty of the world that seemed so distant from the chaos in his mind. For just a moment, he wished he could forget it all, the visions, the knowledge, the weight of what he now carried. He longed for the simplicity of his life before the salmon, when the world had been a mystery, full of wonder and excitement. But the knowledge was there, inside him. It would not let him go. Fionn opened his eyes, and the world seemed sharper, clearer than ever before. The air smelled of earth and wood, the sounds of life surrounding him. And yet, beneath all of it, there was something darker, something he could not ignore. The balance of the world, once so steady, had been disturbed. The gods had given him this wisdom, but they had also given him the responsibility to uphold that balance. How could he possibly bear it? The power of knowledge was not in understanding the future, it was in accepting the burden of knowing it. Fionn realized that the wisdom he had gained was not meant to be a guide, it was meant to be a test. A test of strength, of will. Could he use this knowledge to shape a better future, or would he be consumed by the very things he now understood? As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the land, Fionn made his way back to the camp, his mind a whirl of thoughts. His heart was heavy with the realization of what he had become. He was no longer just Fionn, the boy who had caught the salmon. He was Fionn, the one who held the world's wisdom in his hands. And that was a power no one could ever take away. But it was a power that could break him, too. The balance of light and dark had always been fragile, and now Fionn stood at the center of it all. The gods had given him the gift of wisdom, but with it came a weight that no mortal soul could easily bear. And as he walked, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to choose what he would do with the knowledge that now consumed him. Fionn stood at the head of the Fianna, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The wind whispered through the trees, stirring the leaves like a quiet promise, but it was no longer just the breeze he felt on his skin. It was the weight of his role, the immense responsibility that had settled upon him ever since he tasted the flesh of the Salmon of Knowledge. His mind was alive with 1,000 thoughts, each one sharper than the last. Every movement, every word, every decision carried the weight of the wisdom he now possessed. When Fionn had first caught the salmon, he had been a young warrior, eager to prove his worth, eager for the glory of battle. But now, as he stood among his warriors, the taste of the salmon had changed him in ways that words could scarcely explain. He was no longer just Fionn MacCumhaill. He was something more, something greater, something burdened by the secrets of the world. The warriors of the Fianna looked up to him with a mix of awe and respect. They knew he had become more than just their leader, he had become a force in and of himself. His decisions were no longer made from instinct alone. They were guided by something deeper, something beyond his understanding. With each passing day, the wisdom of the salmon unfolded in his mind, shaping his actions and guiding his path. But with this newfound wisdom came an undeniable weight. Fionn could see the battles ahead, not only on the battlefield but in the hearts of men. He could hear the whispers of those who would betray him, those who would seek to undo all he had fought for. The Fianna followed him, but even they were not immune to the struggles that lay ahead. He could see their fates, their lives, their struggles, and it pained him to know it all. In the quiet moments, when the camp was still and the fires burned low, Fionn would often find himself lost in thought. His mind raced with visions of the future, of the choices he would have to make. Would his leadership be enough to guide them? Could he prevent the disasters he saw looming on the horizon? Every victory, every defeat, felt like part of a larger tapestry he could not escape. His wisdom, so raw and potent, gave him a power few could comprehend. He could see into the hearts of those around him, understanding their motives, their desires, and their fears. This made him a master of diplomacy, able to navigate the delicate dance of politics with a clarity no one could match. Enemies once thought insurmountable became mere obstacles to be overcome with words, not weapons. He could diffuse tensions with a single phrase, turn foes into allies with a well-timed gesture. But even in the calm moments of peace, Fionn felt the weight of his power. Each choice, each action, carried consequences he could see all too clearly. Every decision he made was a thread that wove the future, and the knowledge that he could not undo what was done was a constant companion. When battle came, it was no longer the rush of blood and steel that drove him, but a quiet understanding of the outcome. He could see the tides of war before they even began to rise, and in that knowledge, there was both comfort and terror. His warriors followed him with unwavering loyalty, but there were times when Fionn would pause, feeling the burden of his foresight press against him like a weight too heavy to bear. What if he was wrong? What if the wisdom of the salmon wasn't as clear as it seemed? The first battle he fought with the Fianna after tasting the salmon's wisdom was a brutal one. The enemy was fierce, determined, and unyielding, yet Fionn felt calm, almost detached, as he led his warriors into the fray. His mind was a map, a vision of the battlefield spread out before him, every movement calculated with precision. As he swung his sword, every strike felt as though it had already been written, every enemy he felled, every warrior who followed him into battle, all of it was part of the future he now understood. But with that clarity came a deeper realization. The warriors who fought beside him were not just soldiers, they were his family, his brothers and sisters. And in battle, they faced death, and Fionn could see their deaths as clearly as he could see his own future. The burden of knowing which of them would fall, which of them would live, became a constant ache in his chest. The wisdom of the salmon did not spare him from the pain of loss, it only made it sharper. In moments of victory, the wisdom was a bittersweet reminder of what it cost. He could hear the cries of triumph from his men, but the sound was hollow to him. He could already see the repercussions of their success, what they would gain, what they would lose. Each victory, each battle, was a piece of the puzzle that would eventually lead to something much larger. And yet, for all his knowledge, Fionn felt helpless to change it. As the years passed, Fionn's power continued to grow. The Fianna became the most feared and respected warriors in all of Ireland, but the weight of their leaders' knowledge also grew heavier. The constant tension between fate and free will was a battle Fionn could never escape. He knew that his every decision was guiding the course of history, but he could never fully control what would come. The gods had granted him wisdom, but they had not granted him the power to change everything. Diplomacy, too, was a double-edged sword. Fionn knew the minds of kings and queens, of chieftains and warriors, and he used that knowledge to secure alliances, to forge peace where there would have been war. But there were times when those alliances faltered, when the trust he had built was betrayed. His wisdom gave him the ability to see the cracks before they appeared, but it could not stop them from forming. The more he understood, the more he realized that knowledge was not the key to happiness, it was simply a tool, a weapon, a force to be wielded. And like any weapon, it could cut both ways. Fionn had once sought wisdom out of a hunger for greatness, but now he understood that wisdom was a gift that demanded humility. The power to lead, to know, to understand the future, it was a responsibility he could never escape. It was a burden that weighed on him every day, but it also made him the leader he was. The Fianna followed him, not just for his strength, but because they trusted him to guide them, to carry them through the darkness with the light of his wisdom. But in the silence of the night, Fionn sometimes wondered, what if he had never tasted the salmon? Would he have been a different man? Would he have been able to protect his people without the burden of knowing too much? As the stars shone down on him, Fionn's heart ached with the weight of his power. The wisdom of the salmon had unleashed a force he could never tame, and now, more than ever, he understood the true cost of greatness. Fionn stood on the cliff, the wind whipping through his hair, and yet, for all the roaring winds and crashing waves below, a cold silence enveloped him. His eyes, once sharp with determination, now seemed clouded with something darker, something deeper. He had always known that wisdom, like a sword, could cut through the heart of things, but now he felt it, felt the blade of knowledge sinking into his soul. The Salmon of Knowledge had given him everything, power, insight, a clear path to the future. But at what cost? The answer was not one that could be seen in the flickering flames of the campfire, or heard in the stories told around the hearth. It was something that gnawed at him in the quiet moments, when his mind had nowhere to hide, and the weight of every decision pressed down on him like a heavy cloak. He had once dreamed of leading the Fianna, of proving his strength and skill. But the wisdom of the salmon had taken him far beyond the young warrior he once was. Now, he understood things that no one else could, things about the future, about the hearts of men, and about the balance of light and dark. But it was too much. It was more than he could bear. In the eyes of his comrades, he saw the trust they placed in him. They followed him without question, believing in his wisdom, his strength. But what they didn't know was the cost of that wisdom. What they didn't know was how, in the stillness of night, Fionn would lie awake, his mind racing with the weight of everything he knew. The faces of his comrades, his family, flashed before his eyes. He saw their fates, the paths they would walk, and it twisted his heart. Every life was now a thread in a tapestry he could not change. Fionn's heart longed for the simplicity of his past. When battles were fought for honor, when the future was uncertain, and the world felt open and full of possibility. But now, each decision seemed like a weight on his soul. He could see the consequences before they arrived, could hear the quiet whispers of those who would betray him, the lives that would be lost. The future was no longer something to be conquered, but something to be feared. He turned to face his warriors, the Fianna, who stood before him, ready to follow him into whatever battle came next. His trusted friends, the men and women he had fought beside, each with their own dreams, their own destinies. They looked to him for guidance, for the wisdom he had earned. But what they didn't see was the doubt in his eyes, the uncertainty that gripped him with each decision. Fionn could feel their trust, and it felt like a rope pulling him under the weight of the world. They were looking to him for answers, but all he saw was an endless sea of questions. The responsibility he carried was suffocating. He had been the leader of the Fianna, but now, with the knowledge of the Salmon, he couldn't escape the truth. No one could carry that much power without it changing them. Every battle, every plan, every strategy came with consequences he could already see, and it made his heart ache with the burden of what lay ahead. He had become a man who could rid the future, but at what cost? At times, he would look at his closest friends, Oisin, Diarmuid, and the others, and wish he could be like them, carefree, unburdened by the knowledge of what was to come. They laughed, they fought, they lived without the weight of destiny on their shoulders. They didn't know what Fionn knew, and part of him envied them. They were happy, content, and in their presence, Fionn felt like a stranger to himself. Even his family, those closest to him, felt the strain. His love for them was as deep as ever, but the distance between them had grown. His son, Oisin, would look to him for guidance, but Fionn could already see the struggles Oisin would face in the future. He could see his son's victories, yes, but he could also see the price Oisin would pay for them. And it tore Fionn apart, knowing that he could not protect him from that fate. The love he felt for his family was no longer enough to shield them from the future. Then, there was the pain of knowing that some of his closest allies would fall, and some would betray him. He could see their faces in the midst of battle, their bodies lying on the ground, but there was nothing he could do to stop it. He tried to fight it, tried to make the right choices, but the future was set in ways he could not untangle. The weight of knowledge, once a gift, now felt like a curse. He understood the hearts of men, could see their motives, but it made the world feel empty, as if nothing could surprise him anymore. No victory felt truly sweet, for he already knew its cost. No loss felt final, because he knew the pain was coming. Even the love he had for his comrades felt different. He knew it would not last forever, and the knowledge of that fleeting nature made it more precious, but also unbearably painful. The fire within him, once fueled by ambition and glory, now burned with a quiet, aching sadness. He could feel it deep in his bones, the toll that wisdom took on a man. He had been a hero, a leader, but what had he truly gained? His battles were no longer just with the enemy. They were with the burden of his own mind, with the knowledge that he could not escape the paths laid out before him. Every time he closed his eyes, the future unfolded, and he couldn't stop it. The weight of his leadership, once a crown of glory, was now a heavy burden. He looked at his comrades, his family, and knew they could not fully understand the depth of what he carried. And in that knowledge, there was a terrible loneliness that took root in his heart. The wisdom of the Salmon had made him the leader he was, but it had also made him a prisoner to the very gift he had sought. He had always believed that wisdom would be the key to unlocking the future. Now, he saw that it was the key to his undoing. Every decision, every word, every move was a step toward a future he could no longer control. Fionn MacCumhaill, the once hopeful warrior, now found himself lost in a world of knowledge, a world where every choice seemed to lead to a path filled with both light and darkness. And he wondered, in the quiet spaces between his thoughts, whether it had all been worth it. Fionn's heart trembled as the weight of the curse settled into his bones. The gift of knowledge, the power that had been bestowed upon him in the River Boyne, had not come without its price. He had sought wisdom, hungered for it, believing it would guide him to greatness. But as the days passed, the cost of that wisdom began to sink in, and Fionn realized the truth: wisdom, once earned, could never be separated from sacrifice. It was said that the Salmon of Knowledge was not just a source of enlightenment, but a keeper of ancient secrets. Whoever consumed its flesh would possess unimaginable power and wisdom, yet there was a price, a curse that bound the one who tasted it to the very waters from which the salmon came. Fionn had unknowingly accepted this curse, and now, the weight of it bore down on him like an unshakable shadow. Every time Fionn closed his eyes, he saw the great well of wisdom, Comhaill's well, where the salmon had swum in the clear waters. The pool held the knowledge of the world, and now that knowledge was within him. But so too was the curse, like a quiet whisper in his mind, reminding him that no gift comes without sacrifice. He had tasted the salmon, and in doing so, had bound himself to the well, to the very source of the wisdom he had craved. It was a bond that could not be undone, no matter how much he wished it could. The weight of it was always there, hidden beneath the surface of his thoughts. The more Fionn learned, the more he understood the truth. With wisdom came the burden of knowing things no one else could. And with that knowledge came the knowledge of his own eventual downfall. At first, the changes were subtle. He began to see the world differently. The future no longer seemed uncertain. He could look ahead and see the paths laid out before him, the choices he would make, and their consequences. But as time passed, the weight of that future grew unbearable. It was not just that he knew what would happen, it was that he felt he had no choice in the matter. The salmon had given him knowledge, but it had also taken his freedom. Fionn's relationships began to fray at the edges. Those closest to him, his family, his comrades, could sense that something had changed in him. His eyes no longer held the same fire. The young man they had known, the warrior who had been full of ambition and dreams, had been replaced by a man who saw everything too clearly, too painfully. He no longer found joy in the small victories, the moments of camaraderie that once filled him with life. He saw too much of the future, too much of the cost of every action. He knew where every battle would lead, where each decision would take him, and it wore him down, piece by piece. The curse was not a physical one. It didn't manifest in the way the world expected. There was no mark on his skin, no outward sign of the magic that bound him. But inside, deep in his heart, Fionn felt the pull of the well. The wisdom he carried was not just a gift, but a chain. The more he used it, the more he felt tethered to the very source of that knowledge. His fate was linked to the well of wisdom, and it haunted him in ways he could never have imagined. The weight of his newfound power pushed Fionn to the edge. The future he had seen, the lives that he knew would be lost, the betrayals that would occur, it all weighed on him, suffocating him in a way that no enemy's sword ever could. He longed to be free, to return to the simple warrior he once was, when the world was full of uncertainty and possibility. But he couldn't go back. The curse of the salmon held him fast, and every time he tried to escape it, he was drawn back to the well, back to the endless well of knowledge that could never be unlearned. His comrades Luoisin, Diarmuid, the brave men and women of the Fianna, noticed the change. The fire that had once burned in Fionn's heart now flickered weakly, as though it was being extinguished by the weight of what he knew. They sought to lift his spirits, to remind him of the strength and valor that had always guided him. But no words could fill the emptiness that had taken root in his soul. They didn't understand. How could they? They didn't carry the knowledge that burned inside him, the curse that kept him tethered to a future that was both his gift and his burden. The curse was not just about Fionn's relationship with the salmon, but with the world around him. The more he saw, the less he was able to do. He couldn't change what he knew, couldn't unsee the fate that awaited his loved ones. Each time he tried to act, to fight for a better future, the knowledge of the inevitable flooded his mind, and he felt powerless to alter the course of events. Fionn had wanted wisdom, but now that he had it, he understood the truth. Wisdom without the ability to change things was a cruel joke. The curse of the salmon bound him not only to the well of knowledge, but to a life of unrelenting awareness. Every step he took was weighed down by the knowledge of the cost of every action, and with each day, the burden grew heavier. In his quieter moments, Fionn would stand by the river Boyne, the place where it had all begun, and look out over the waters. The river seemed endless, stretching out to the horizon, just like the vastness of the knowledge that now filled him. He could almost hear the salmon swimming beneath the surface, taunting him with the truth he could never escape. There was no way out. The salmon's curse had claimed him, just as it had claimed all those who had tasted its flesh before him. Wisdom, it seemed, was a gift too great to bear. And so, Fionn walked through the world, a man caught between light and shadow. The wisdom he had earned had transformed him, had lifted him to great heights, but it had also bound him to an eternal cycle. He could see the future, but it was a future that had already been written, a future that could never be changed. The price of wisdom was sacrifice, and Fionn had sacrificed more than he could have ever imagined. He had gained everything, and lost it all at once. The day the salmon died, the world seemed to hold its breath. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, as though the earth itself knew that something irreparable had just unfolded. For so long, the Salmon of Knowledge had swum in the clear waters of Comla's well, embodying the mysteries of the universe, the wisdom of the gods. It was a symbol of everything that could be known, everything that could be understood. But now, its life was slipping away, and with it, something larger than just a creature, something vital, something irreplaceable, was fading into shadow. Fionn stood at the water's edge, staring into the shimmering surface of the river Boyne, where the salmon had once lived. He had felt the tremors of change long before the fish had finally succumbed to its fate. It was not a simple death, but a mythological end, woven by the hands of fate and the will of the gods themselves. The act was not merely the passing of a creature, but the death of an era, the death of a link between the divine and the mortal worlds. The salmon had been a guardian, a keeper of knowledge. Its flesh held secrets that the gods had kept hidden from mortal eyes. Those who sought its wisdom had been granted gifts beyond measure, but they had also been burdened with the knowledge of the world's darkest truths. The balance of power in the world had always depended on this fragile connection between the realms of gods and men. And yet, now, that delicate balance was being shattered. The salmon's death was not by accident, nor was it the result of any mortal hand alone. It was a decision, an act of divine intervention. The gods had watched the mortals who had tasted the fish, seen the dangers of wisdom growing too vast. The salmon had become a symbol of both enlightenment and destruction, and the gods knew it could not live forever. They knew the wisdom it carried was too great for any single being to bear, and so they decided it must die. But the death of the salmon came at a terrible cost. It was as though the very pulse of the world had been stilled, as if all of existence had paused to take in the enormity of what was happening. There were whispers in the heavens, soft voices in the wind, that foretold of a great change to come. What would happen now that the salmon was no more? What would the world become when the well of wisdom, once so full, was emptied? For Fionn, it was as if the ground beneath him was crumbling. His connection to the salmon was intimate, personal. It was the reason he had gained the knowledge he now carried, the wisdom that shaped his every decision. He had tasted the flesh of the fish, and in doing so, had become part of it. Its death was his death. The loss of the salmon felt like the loss of a part of himself. The wisdom he had gained, was it now meaningless? Had he been too late to claim its power, too late to fully understand what it had to offer? The gods had their reasons, but to Fionn, it felt as though they had taken everything from him. His newfound powers, the visions, the insights into the future, all seemed to flicker and fade, like a candle's flame in the wind. The knowledge he had once been so proud of now felt distant, impossible to grasp. The more he reached for it, the more it slipped through his fingers, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before his eyes. The death of the salmon also shifted the balance of power among the gods themselves. The knowledge that had once been locked within the creature's heart had now been freed, but it was no longer contained in one place. It was scattered, drifting like ashes in the wind, with no one to control it. The gods, too, felt the absence. The wise, ancient deities who had once relied on the salmon to maintain their understanding of the world now found themselves in a disorienting silence. Without the salmon, the lines between the gods and humans began to blur. There was no longer an obvious channel of communication between the two realms. The gods had been the guardians of wisdom, but now that wisdom was free to spill into the world, uncontrolled and unpredictable. No longer confined to the sacred waters of Comla's well, it threatened to flood everything, leaving destruction in its wake. For Fionn, the death of the salmon also meant something else, something even more personal. He had relied on that wisdom, trusted it to guide him through every trial, every battle. He had depended on the knowledge that came from the salmon to lead his warriors, to lead his people. He had believed that with the salmon, nothing was beyond his reach. But with its death, he found himself facing the world without that guiding light. It was in this quiet devastation that Fionn first began to understand the full weight of the curse that had been placed upon him. The gods had given him wisdom, but they had also tied him to its loss. It was not the gift of knowledge that had truly burdened him, it was the awareness of its fragility. The salmon's death was proof that even the greatest of gifts could be lost. It was a reminder that nothing, no matter how powerful, could last forever. Fionn felt the sting of that lesson deep in his soul. He had once believed that wisdom was a gift to be used without limits, that it was a force that could change the world. But now he saw the cost of that knowledge. The gods had made their choice, and with the salmon's death, the balance of all things had shifted. The future no longer seemed so certain, the path forward more obscured. The weight of the loss settled like a heavy cloak over him. The world had changed. And so had Fionn. The death of the salmon was not just a mythological event, it was a turning point in the history of the gods and the mortals alike. It marked the end of an era of knowledge and power, and the beginning of a new, uncertain age. The gods had intervened, and the consequences of that intervention were felt throughout the land. But for Fionn, it was a personal tragedy, the loss of a guide, a mentor, a part of himself. He stood at the river's edge, staring into the waters that had once held the secret of all things. The silence around him was overwhelming, as if the world was waiting, holding its breath, for what would come next. But for Fionn, the question was no longer what would happen. It was whether he could still find a way forward. Without the salmon, without the wisdom it had given him, could he lead his people? Could he still be the hero they needed him to be? The future had always been uncertain, but now, in the wake of the salmon's death, it was more uncertain than ever. The world had lost something irreplaceable, and in that loss, Fionn's journey had taken a turn he had never expected. The power of knowledge, it seemed, was not just in its possession, but in the ability to let it go. The day the salmon died, it wasn't just the end of a life, it was the end of an era. The world had lost something irreplaceable, a well of wisdom that had once been freely available, a source of knowledge that had shaped the lives of heroes, kings, and gods alike. The waters of Comla's well, which had once rippled with the power of divine insight, now stood still and silent, as if mourning the loss of the very thing that had made them sacred. For generations, the salmon had been a beacon of truth, a living testament to the bond between the gods and mortals. Those who were brave enough to seek it, those who could prove themselves worthy, were rewarded with knowledge beyond measure. But no longer. The salmon's death marked a shift, a moment in time when the world would change, when wisdom would no longer be handed out so easily. It wasn't just that the wisdom was gone, it was the way in which that wisdom had been shared. In the days when the salmon lived, anyone who encountered it could learn, could grow, could see the world with new eyes. Fionn, and so many before him, had received their understanding as a gift, one that connected them to the divine. But with the passing of the salmon, that connection weakened. No longer would knowledge flow so freely from the gods into the hands of mortals. It was as if the very fabric of the world was changing, and with it, the way people would seek and use wisdom. But even in death, the salmon's influence was not gone entirely. Like all great things, its legacy would endure, though in a new form. The wisdom it had carried, once so concentrated and easily obtained, would now be passed on, but not through simple acts of fate. Now, it would be the responsibility of each hero, each successor, to carry that knowledge forward in their own way, to find their own paths toward understanding. Fionn, standing in the shadow of the loss, realized that he could not be the last to bear the weight of the salmon's gift. The wisdom he had gained would not be the end of the line, it would become a part of something larger. He knew, deep in his heart, that the world would need someone else to carry the torch. There would be new heroes, new leaders who would rise up and take on the mantle, just as he had. The wisdom he had learned was not meant to end with him. It was in this moment that Fionn's true understanding of the salmon's gift came to light. The death of the fish had not been a curse, nor had it been a punishment. It was a cycle, a transformation. The knowledge of the gods was not meant to rest in one place, not meant to be contained in one creature or one hero. It had to be passed on, shared among those who would continue to seek it, those who would fight for it. The legacy of the salmon, its essence, would now find its way into the hearts of others. The heroes who followed Fionn, those who came after him, drawn to the well of wisdom, would find their own ways of accessing the knowledge that had once been so easily obtained. But it would not come without cost. They would have to work for it, earn it in their own ways, just as Fionn had. The wisdom would no longer come with a simple taste of the salmon's flesh. It would come through sacrifice, through struggle, and through the heartache of understanding that, with wisdom comes great responsibility. Fionn's successors would carry this burden differently. Some would fight for justice, others for peace, but all would face the weight of knowing that true wisdom came with its own darkness. The lessons of the salmon, the power, the wisdom, and the consequences would be passed from one generation to the next. The knowledge would no longer be a one-time gift. It would become something that heroes had to earn, something they would need to protect. As the years passed, the heroes who came after Fionn did not always understand the full scope of the salmon's gift, but they felt its weight just the same. Some found their paths guided by visions, others by ancient teachings, but the essence of the salmon was never truly lost. It lived on in the stories told around fires, in the songs sung by bards, and the lessons taught by wise mentors. The world changed, and the way wisdom was given and received shifted, but the need for knowledge, for guidance, for understanding, remained constant. In the end, the salmon's death was not the end of wisdom, but the beginning of a new era, one in which heroes would rise up and carry forward the legacy of knowledge. The death of the salmon did not silence the flow of wisdom, it transformed it into something more personal, more human. It required a new kind of hero, one who would be able to balance the light and dark of the wisdom they carried, one who would understand that knowledge could be both a blessing and a curse. The death of the salmon, the passing of that great well of wisdom, was not a tragedy, but a moment of transformation. It was the end of a time when wisdom was handed out easily and the beginning of a time when it would be earned through struggle, through sacrifice, and through an understanding of its true cost. And in that, the salmon's legacy lived on, not just in Fionn, but in every hero who would seek knowledge, and in every leader who would face the consequences of wielding such power. As Fionn stood alone by the river, he felt the weight of what had passed, but also the flicker of hope that came with knowing that the salmon's legacy was far from gone. It lived in him, and it would live in others. And perhaps, in the end, that was the greatest gift of all. The salmon had died, its flesh consumed, its wisdom seemingly lost to the depths of the river Boyne. But the wisdom of the salmon was never meant to be contained by time or death. It was eternal, an endless current flowing beneath the surface of the world, waiting to return. In the myths that followed, the salmon's wisdom did not disappear into oblivion. It rose again, taking new forms, flowing through new lives. The world was never truly without it. It is said that the Cailleach, the great crone of winter, who controlled the seasons and the fate of all things, found herself in possession of the salmon's wisdom. Through her, the essence of the great fish passed into the winds, the rocks, the streams. Her power lay in her knowledge of the earth, and the deep wisdom she carried about birth and death, the turning of the seasons, and the unbreakable threads that connect all life. And though she wielded that knowledge as a force of nature, it was never easy. The Cailleach's wisdom was one of both creation and destruction. She understood that to bring life meant to end another, to begin something new meant to leave something behind. The wisdom of the salmon lived on in her, but it was never without its costs. Then there were those like Oisin and Diarmuid, the heroes of legend, who carried the salmon's wisdom in their hearts without ever tasting its flesh. The wisdom had a way of finding them, of imprinting itself on their souls. Oisin, with his deep connection to the land and to the ancient ways, was often spoken of as one who held the stories of the world. He was more than a warrior, he was a keeper of all that had come before and a seer of all that could be. His heart was bound to the wisdom that coursed through him, a gift that was his to protect, but also to bear. Oisin's story was marked by both beauty and sorrow. He saw the future with perfect clarity, yet his gift came with a deep loneliness. His knowledge separated him from others. He knew the fleeting nature of life, the inevitability of loss, the painful weight of time. He could see the end of every tale before it had even begun. And it was through this, through the wisdom he carried, that Oisin would learn what it truly meant to be human, to be both blessed and burdened by the knowledge of all things. But even Oisin was not alone in this. Diarmuid, too, was touched by the wisdom of the salmon. His gifts were not just of strength, but of insight, of understanding the hearts of others, and of the deep connection between the land and the people. He could see the invisible threads that tied everything together, the way the past shaped the present, how the future was a reflection of choices made today. Yet, like Oisin, Diarmuid found that with such wisdom came a heavy heart. He knew the paths of those around him, could sense the dangers that lay ahead, and yet he was unable to change the course of fate. The burden of his wisdom was a quiet, aching pain that lingered even as he lived a life of greatness. The salmon's wisdom, like a river, kept flowing through these heroes, though in ways they had never imagined. It was not always a direct inheritance. At times, it came as an echo, a whisper carried on the winds of time. The connection was subtle, but it was there, woven into the fabric of their destinies. And in the same way that Oisin and Diarmuid carried it, so would future heroes, leaders, and dreamers. The wisdom of the salmon had a way of choosing its vessels, of finding those whose hearts were pure enough to hold it, but strong enough to endure its weight. And yet, despite the heroes who carried the wisdom forward, the truth remained: there was a cyclical nature to knowledge itself. The wisdom that had once been freely shared with the heroes of the past had become something that each new generation would have to fight for, to search for, to earn. There was no easy access to it anymore. It had become something that must be sought, something that would require sacrifice. Just as the salmon had died and risen again, so too did the wisdom come in cycles, appearing in the most unexpected of places, and the most unlikely of people. The world was forever changed by the salmon's wisdom, but it wasn't an ending. It was simply another beginning. The death of the salmon had not been its final act. No, the wisdom lived on, carried forward in the hearts of those brave enough to seek it, wise enough to understand its costs, and strong enough to bear its burden. The legacy of the salmon would never fade away, for it was not a treasure that could be owned or hoarded. It was a gift, passed on through time, through stories, through those who dared to take on the mantle and continue the cycle. And so, as the myths continued to unfold, the salmon's wisdom found its way into the hands of new heroes, who would carry it, pass it along, and then let it go, knowing that they, too, were part of the great cycle. Oisin, Diarmuid, and the others may have been the carriers of the salmon's legacy in their time, but they were not the end of the story. In every age, there would be those who would seek out wisdom, who would learn to carry it, who would understand that knowledge, while powerful, was never meant to be held forever. It was a gift that had to be given away, to keep the world turning, to keep the wisdom alive, flowing like a river that could never be dammed, but only shared. And in that, there was beauty, knowing that the wisdom of the salmon would always return, just as the seasons would turn, just as life would bloom again after every winter. It was a promise. A promise that no matter how many times it seemed to end, the wisdom would return. Always. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying the stories of ancient times, of wisdom passed down through the ages, of knowledge that had no beginning and no end. The trees, standing tall and still, held secrets in their branches, in their roots, in the very air that stirred around them. These were no ordinary trees, they were the keepers of knowledge. Their roots stretched deep into the earth, tapping into a power older than the sun, older than the stars. The oak, the yew, the apple, each of these trees was sacred, revered for their connection to the unseen world, to the flow of wisdom that ran through the veins of the earth. And it was said that the wisdom of the Salmon of Knowledge was not only found in the depths of the river, but also in the heart of these trees. The salmon's spirit lived within the wind that rustled the leaves, the silent whispers that echoed from the branches, and the steady roots that clung to the soil beneath. These trees were more than just trees, they were vessels, holding within them the answers to questions unspoken, the truths that lay hidden in the natural world. The oak, with its wide branches reaching toward the sky, was the tree of strength and endurance, its wisdom rooted in the cycles of life and death. It had seen centuries pass and had witnessed the rise and fall of kings, the birth and death of heroes. It knew the balance between the forces of light and dark, of good and evil, and stood as a symbol of the power that wisdom could hold. In the oak, the salmon's wisdom was like a slow, steady stream, deep, quiet, and enduring. To sit beneath an oak tree was to feel the pulse of time, to understand that every moment was part of something much larger. Then there was the yew, dark and mysterious, its ancient branches heavy with the weight of centuries. It was said that the yew held the wisdom of the underworld, the knowledge of the ancestors who had long since passed into the mists of time. To stand in the shadow of a yew was to feel the pull of the past, to hear the distant whispers of those who had walked the earth before. It was in the yew that the darker side of wisdom resided, the knowledge that came with sacrifice, with loss, with the understanding that every life had its end, and that every end held within it the seed of a new beginning. The yew was where the salmon's wisdom became a reminder that all things must pass, but that in the passing, there was a deeper truth to be found. And the apple tree, gentle, fragrant, and full of promise. The apple was the fruit of knowledge, its sweet, crisp flesh offering insight to those who dared to taste. The apple tree, with its blossoms in spring and its fruit in autumn, was the bridge between the earth and the heavens. It connected the mortal world with the divine, offering wisdom that was both immediate and eternal. In the apple's sweetness, there was a sharpness, a knowledge that could cut through the heart of any illusion. It was said that to stand beneath the apple tree was to feel the pulse of both the present and the future, as if the very essence of time itself could be touched in the hanging fruit. The salmon of knowledge was reflected in the apple tree's ability to reveal the truths hidden beneath the surface. These trees, though different in their shapes and their offerings, were all bound by the same thread of wisdom, a wisdom that had been shared with the world through the teachings of the salmon. And just as the salmon lived in the rivers, so did the knowledge flow through the trees, passing from one generation to the next, from the land to the sky, and back again. The natural world was the ultimate keeper of knowledge, and those who took the time to listen could hear its voice in the rustling of the leaves, and the sway of the branches, in the movement of the animals that lived within and around the trees. The world was alive with wisdom, if only one had the eyes to see it, the ears to hear it, and the heart to understand it. To sit beneath an oak, a yew, or an apple tree was to be in the presence of something ancient, something that knew the secrets of the earth and the heavens. It was to understand that wisdom did not belong to any one person, that it was not something that could be owned or controlled. It was a gift that flowed through the world, carried by the wind, by the rivers, by the very air we breathe. The trees were the guardians of that wisdom, and they knew the importance of reverence. For knowledge came not just from seeking, but from listening, from paying attention to the world around you and understanding your place within it. The wisdom of the salmon lived in the trees, but it also lived in the hearts of those who respected the earth, who understood that the balance of nature was sacred. It was in the quiet moments, when the world stood still, that the wisdom could be felt most clearly. It was in the moments when one could hear the earth breathing, when one could feel the pulse of life beneath the surface, that the wisdom of the salmon was most alive. In a world that moved quickly, that sought after knowledge through books and learning, there was something timeless about the wisdom that could be found in nature. It was not the kind of knowledge that could be captured in words, but the kind that was lived. The wisdom of the salmon, passed through the trees, was the wisdom of the earth itself, a wisdom that could not be bought or sold, but only respected and revered. It was in the rustle of the oak leaves, the shadow of the yew, and the scent of the apple blossoms that the true wisdom of the salmon could be felt. It was in these moments, these quiet connections with nature, that the heart could hear the deepest truths. The trees had always known. They had always been the keepers of knowledge. And as long as the trees stood, the wisdom of the salmon would remain alive, carried in the wind, in the earth, and in the hearts of those who took the time to listen. There was a moment, late in the day, when the sun's rays cast a golden glow over the training ground of the Fianna. The sound of swords clashing, the rhythm of feet on the earth, the fierce, determined grunts of warriors who were not yet legends, but were bound for greatness. In the center of it all stood Fionn MacCumhaill, his gaze sharp, his mind always a few steps ahead of those around him. He watched the young warriors, not with judgment, but with a quiet pride and patience, knowing they were not yet where they needed to be, but they would be. In his heart, Fionn knew that the legacy of the Salmon of Knowledge would pass through these warriors. Their journey would not just be one of strength and skill, but of wisdom, a wisdom that could only be gained through experience, through sacrifice, and through the teachings of those who had walked the path before them. Fionn had received the wisdom of the salmon in his blood, but it was in teaching others that the true weight of that knowledge became clear. The Fianna were more than just an army of warriors. They were a brotherhood, a family, a gathering of souls bound together by the understanding that their power came from more than just their swords or their might. It came from something deeper. It came from the earth, from the winds, from the rivers, from the trees, and from the ancient wisdom that had been passed down through generations. In the evenings, as the fire crackled and the stars began to fill the sky, Fionn would gather the young warriors around him. He didn't speak much, not at first. He let them come to him, asking their questions, seeking his counsel. And in those moments, Fionn would share not only his knowledge but his experience. His words were not of strategy alone, but of the heart, the weight of responsibility, the cost of leadership, the need to be true to oneself, and the constant search for balance. The wisdom he passed on was not always about what to do in battle, but about what it meant to be a hero in the first place. Mentorship was something sacred in the Fianna. It was the heart of their existence. Fionn didn't just teach them how to fight. He taught them how to think, how to question, how to grow. His wisdom was not something he kept for himself. It was meant to be shared. The warriors who fought by his side would one day teach the next generation, passing on not only the strength of their arms, but the depth of their spirit. In those quiet, powerful moments, Fionn gave them a glimpse of what it meant to truly lead, to hold knowledge and wisdom not as a burden, but as a gift to be given freely. One young warrior, Cuchulainn, would always remember Fionn's lessons. His eyes, fierce with the hunger to prove himself, often shone with questions, with doubts, with a longing for something he could not yet understand. And Fionn, with his eyes that seemed to have seen more than any mortal should, would look at him and say nothing, allowing the young warrior to struggle with his own thoughts. But in those silences, Cuchulainn learned more than any words could convey. He learned that to be a true hero was not to seek glory for oneself, but to understand that every act of heroism came with sacrifice, came with responsibility. The words of the old warriors, the lessons Fionn imparted, filled the air like the very breeze that carried the scent of earth and rain. Each of these teachings was not just a lesson in battle, but in the deeper meaning of life, about who they were and who they were meant to become. Fionn's teachings were full of pain, but also of beauty. Every hero he mentored knew that they could never be perfect, but that it was in striving for something greater that they would find their true selves. Every mistake they made, every loss they endured, would eventually be woven into the fabric of their wisdom. The beauty of mentorship lay in the way Fionn allowed his warriors to discover their own paths. He would give them tools, guidance, and a steady hand, but it was up to them to learn how to use those tools, how to find their own strength, and how to grow into the leaders they were meant to be. Sometimes, the hardest lesson to teach was the lesson of patience. The wisdom of the salmon did not come overnight. It came through struggle, through questioning, and through the unyielding pursuit of knowledge, no matter the cost. It wasn't always easy to be a mentor, especially for Fionn. The weight of his knowledge sometimes pressed down on him like a heavy cloak, and he knew the same would be true for those he taught. There were moments when he doubted himself, moments when he wondered if he had made the right choices, moments when he feared the wisdom he held would tear him apart. But it was in those moments, when the fire of uncertainty burned the brightest, that the truest heroes emerged. The warriors he mentored were not born from his teachings alone. They were born from their own struggles, their own willingness to confront their fears and face the unknown. As the years passed, Fionn's role as a mentor became clearer. He was not just the leader of the Fianna, he was the guide, the protector, the one who held the torch of wisdom high so that others might see. And the warriors who stood by him became more than just his comrades, they became his family. They became the next generation of heroes, each one carrying a piece of Fionn's wisdom with them as they moved forward into the world. The knowledge passed from one warrior to the next, like a flame passed from one hand to another, growing brighter with each generation, but also growing ever more fragile with the weight of time. There was something deeply sacred about the act of teaching. In those moments, when Fionn looked into the eyes of the young warriors, he saw not just their potential, but the flickering light of the salmon's wisdom, the same light that had once guided him. It was in their willingness to listen, to learn, to face their own flaws and doubts, that the true legacy of the salmon lived on. For knowledge, true knowledge, is not meant to be hoarded or guarded jealously. It is meant to be shared, passed down, like the blood of the earth, like the wisdom of the trees, like the steady flow of the rivers. And as Fionn continued to guide his warriors, he knew that the greatest gift he could give them was not victory in battle, but the strength to make the right choices, the wisdom to see beyond their own desires, and the courage to walk the path of heroism, no matter how steep or dark it may seem. There was a quiet stillness that hung over the land, a heavy silence that had not been felt before. The Fianna, once a mighty force of warriors, their names carried on the wind like a song, now seemed to have faded into the shadows. Their campfires that once blazed with laughter and strength now flickered weakly, as if the heart of their brotherhood had begun to wane. The songs of their triumphs no longer echoed through the valleys. The earth, once alive with the rhythm of their march, now seemed to mourn for them. In the distance, the familiar sight of their banners, which once soared high above the fields, now hung limp, their colors dulled with time. Fionn, the great leader, stood in the midst of it all, his back bent with age, his eyes clouded with the weight of years and decisions. He could feel it, the slow, inevitable decline. The fire of the Fianna was no longer the fierce blaze it once had been, and he knew that soon it would be extinguished. His heart ached at the thought, but he also knew that everything, even greatness, must come to an end. The time of the Fianna had passed. The magic of the salmon, the knowledge that had flowed freely like a river in the days of old, was now a distant memory. The winds of change had swept through Ireland. What once seemed eternal, the traditions of the Druids, the ancient rituals, and the connection to the sacred land, was slowly fading away. The forests that had held the secrets of the world seemed to whisper in sorrow, as though they too could feel the shift. The people who had once revered the wisdom of the Druids now turned their faces toward something new, something different. Christianity was spreading across the land like a fire, burning through the old ways and leaving behind the ashes of a world that had once been. The Druids, the keepers of knowledge, had begun to lose their place in the hearts of the people. Their sacred teachings, passed down through generations, no longer held the same weight. The rituals, the songs, the reverence for nature, all of it was being pushed aside in favor of a new order. And with it, the wisdom of the salmon, the knowledge that had been cherished for so long, began to slip through the fingers of the people like sand. The magic that had once been so tangible, so alive, was now a fading memory. It was in these quiet, uncertain times that Fionn found himself reflecting on the days of old. He remembered when the Fianna were at their peak, when they were not just warriors but the very heart of Ireland. They had been the embodiment of the land's strength and wisdom, bound together by a common purpose. Fionn had once stood tall, his mind sharp with the knowledge of the salmon, leading his warriors with the wisdom of the ages. But now, his strength was fading, and with it, the strength of the Fianna. Fionn looked to the hills that had once been the backdrop of his triumphs. The oaks, the yews, the apples, the trees that had held the wisdom of the earth, seemed to mourn with him. The natural world, which had once been a keeper of sacred knowledge, now stood silent, as if it too had witnessed the closing of an era. The balance of the world was shifting, and in the quiet that followed, Fionn could feel the weight of it. It was not just the end of the Fianna. It was the end of a time when knowledge, when wisdom, had been freely accessible to those who sought it. The Druids, who had once been the guardians of the old ways, now found themselves struggling to hold onto their place in a world that was changing faster than they could comprehend. The teachings they had passed down with such care and devotion seemed to fall on deaf ears. The young warriors who had once looked to them for guidance now looked elsewhere. The bond between man and nature, between the earth and the heavens, was slowly being severed. And with it, the wisdom that had once flowed freely like a river was becoming a trickle. As Christianity spread, the old ways were pushed further into the shadows. The sacred groves where Druids had once gathered in reverence were now being replaced by churches and altars to a new god. The mysteries of the earth were no longer seen as sacred. The ancient wisdom of the salmon, the knowledge that had been passed down through the ages, was now being viewed with suspicion, even fear. The world was changing, and it seemed that the very foundation of Ireland's soul was being uprooted. But Fionn, though weary, still clung to the knowledge that had been passed to him. He knew that the wisdom of the salmon would not vanish entirely. It would not be extinguished like a dying flame. No, the knowledge would live on, carried in the hearts of those who had once known it. Even as the Fianna faded, as the Druids fell into obscurity, Fionn understood that wisdom was never truly lost, it was simply transformed. The old ways would find new paths, new bearers, and the hearts of those who still carried the flame. The era of the Fianna was coming to a close, but the legacy of their wisdom would live on. It would be carried, in quiet whispers, and the teachings of heroes like Cuchulainn, and the songs of bards who would tell the stories of the past. The wisdom of the salmon, once free for all to see, would now become a treasure guarded by those who understood its weight. The world was changing, and though the old ways were slipping away, there was still something eternal about the knowledge that had been gained. It lived in the land, in the trees, in the very air. Finn's heart ached as he watched the world shift around him, but he also knew that wisdom, true wisdom, would find its place, even in this new age. The Fianna would pass, the Druids would fade, and the world would continue to turn. But the knowledge that had once been so freely available, so open, would now become something sacred, something to be sought out, something to be revered. And as Fionn looked out over the land one last time, he knew that though the world had changed, its soul would always carry the memory of the salmon's wisdom. Even now, when the world is so different, the legend of the Salmon of Knowledge lingers in the hearts of the Irish. Its story has transcended time, growing like the roots of an ancient tree, wrapping itself around the very essence of Irish identity. There are moments, quiet and still, when a young child listens to an elder tell of Fionn and the salmon, their eyes wide with wonder. The words, though spoken softly, carry with them the weight of centuries, the promise that wisdom is not something distant, but something within reach, waiting to be uncovered. On quiet evenings, when the sun sets low over the hills, people still speak of the salmon's magic. It has become more than just a story, it is a part of the land, a part of the very air they breathe. As the fire flickers in the hearth and the shadows of the trees stretch long across the earth, one can almost hear the whispers of the ancient wisdom that the salmon represents. It calls out, not just to the dreamers or the seekers of the past, but to all who still believe that knowledge is a treasure worth pursuing. What makes this myth so powerful, so enduring, is not just the allure of wisdom but the understanding that it comes at a price. Fionn, having gained the knowledge of the salmon, was both blessed and burdened by it. And yet, that very tension, the balance between what is gained and what is lost, resonates with people even today. The pursuit of wisdom, much like in the stories of the Fianna, is not an easy path. It requires sacrifice, patience, and a willingness to face the consequences of knowing too much. But for all the challenges, it is a journey that many continue to take, believing that the reward is worth it. In modern Ireland, the echoes of the salmon's wisdom can be seen in more than just stories. It has woven itself into the fabric of art, where artists, poets, and musicians draw from its depths, creating works that reflect the search for truth. There is an unmistakable quality in Irish art that ties it to the land, something rooted in the earth itself. The shapes, the colors, the strokes, they are all expressions of the same eternal quest for meaning that Fionn once embarked on, chasing after the salmon. Whether through the brush of a painter, the words of a poet, or the strings of a harp, the myth continues to inspire. Even in the modern age, when the world can feel fast-paced and disconnected, the legend speaks to a deeper longing in the human soul. People still hunger for knowledge, for truth, for that connection to something greater. Just as Fionn sought the wisdom of the salmon, people today search for answers in their lives, whether through study, through experience, or through the quiet moments of reflection. The story teaches that wisdom does not come easily, that it takes time, patience, and a willingness to confront the unknown. It reminds us that the pursuit of truth is never straightforward, and often, it is in the struggle itself that the most valuable lessons are learned. And perhaps, the greatest gift of the salmon is this: it offers no guarantees. There are no promises that the search for wisdom will lead to happiness, nor that it will be without pain. It is a path that must be chosen again and again, one that asks not for blind faith, but for a deep, unshakable belief that the pursuit itself is worth every step, every sacrifice. In today's world, where information is more accessible than ever, we are constantly confronted with knowledge. But it is not always easy to discern what is true, what is valuable, or what is worth knowing. The wisdom of the salmon offers a gentle reminder. True wisdom is not just knowing the facts, but understanding how to use them and knowing when to keep quiet, to listen, and to wait. There are still places in Ireland, hidden in plain sight, where the spirit of the salmon can be felt. The rivers that twist through the countryside, their waters sparkling with the reflection of the sky, are more than just bodies of water. They are sacred places where the past and present meet. The mountains, ancient and weathered, hold stories in their stones. The trees, the oak, the yew, the apple, still stand as silent witnesses to the wisdom that once filled the land. In these places, one can almost feel the pulse of the earth, the echo of ancient teachings, reminding those who listen that knowledge is not something to be possessed, but something to be respected. Perhaps the most profound part of the salmon's legacy is its timeless nature. The story does not end with Fionn, nor does it rest only in the pages of old books. It is alive, constantly evolving, just as wisdom itself does. The lessons of the salmon, about patience, about sacrifice, about the delicate balance between light and dark, continue to shape the lives of those who dare to seek deeper meaning. It is in the quiet moments of reflection, the stolen hours spent with books or in nature, that the spirit of the salmon continues to touch hearts and inspire minds. In the end, the salmon's wisdom is not a destination, but a journey. It teaches that the pursuit of knowledge is not about finding all the answers, but about learning how to ask the right questions. It is about understanding that wisdom is not something that can be owned, but something that must be nurtured, passed down, and shared. Like the salmon, which swam through the rivers of time, wisdom flows through the hearts of those who are willing to seek it, to work for it, and to carry it forward into the future. It is this eternal wisdom, this knowledge that transcends time and place, that continues to shape the soul of Ireland. And so, as the firelight dances and the world moves forward, the legend of the Salmon of Knowledge endures, lighting the way for all those who are willing to listen, to learn, and to embrace the power of wisdom. Its legacy is not just in the past, but in the present and in the future, where its lessons will continue to inspire new generations, teaching them that wisdom, though fleeting, is never truly lost.